Russian Revolution? Well, actually, there were three revolutions: the Russian Revolution of 1905, the February Revolution, and the October Revolution. In Russia, there were three groups: the conservatives, the moderates, and the socialists. The conservatives supported Tsar Nicholas II, who was the ruler of Russia. Vladimir Lenin led the Bolsheviks, who were socialists. Alexander Kerensky was a leader of the moderates. In Russia, the Tsar held absolute power. While the rest of Europe industrialized and improved the economy and conditions for the people, Russia, the largest and most populous nation at the time, consisted of land-owning nobles who resisted reform and serfs who were bound to the land. Tsars occasionally attempted reform, but then usually reversed them. After the Russian defeat in the Crimean War, liberals demanded reforms. Tsar Alexander II agreed to free all serfs. However, serfs were too poor to buy the land they worked, so they remained poor. Alexander II also made other reforms, such as setting up local elected assemblies called Zemstvos, easing censorship, reducing military service, and encouraging the growth of industry. However, many Russians were not satisfied with his limited reforms, and he was assassinated by radicals in 1881. His son and successor Alexander III responded by undoing the reforms and repressing the Russian people. He especially suppressed other cultures and religions, especially Jews. Under Alexander III and his son Nicholas II, Russia began to industrialize. However, industrialization did not improve life for Russia's poor. Workers faced long hours, low pay, and poor conditions. Many Russians began accepting radical socialist ideas. In 1904, the Russo-Japanese War began. Patriotic feelings swept through Russia. However, the war turned out to be an embarrassing defeat for the Russians. As discontent spread, the Russian people protested more and more. One priest named Father George Gapin organized a very peaceful protest, hoping to get Tsar Nicholas II to understand the people's problems. However, the Tsar's winter palace was guarded by soldiers, who fired at the crowd. The incident became known as Bloody Sunday, and caused the people to lose faith in the Tsar. The people revolted all across Russia. Eventually, Nicholas agreed to some reforms and to summon an elected National Assembly called a Duma that regulated any past laws. However, Nicholas dissolved the Duma when it challenged his authority. His new prime minister, Peter Stolypin, was a conservative who continued the repression of the Russian people. However, he also made reforms, such as improving education and strengthening the elected Zemstvos that Alexander II had put in place. The Russian Revolution of 1905 began in early 1905 and ended in 1906, but unrest continued in Russia after it, up until World War I in 1914. At first, people felt a wave of Russian patriotism. However, like the Crimean and Russo-Japanese War, Russia did poorly in World War I. Factories could not keep up with the needs of soldiers. It quickly depleted resources and led to famine and other problems. The Tsar decided to move to the front lines to take charge of the war. However, he was not capable of leading his army. Additionally, he left his affairs to his German wife, Tsarina Alexandra. She took advice from an illiterate peasant who claimed to have special powers named Grigory Rasputin, who had gained influence over the Tsar and Tsarina. He became a source of scandal in the Russian government, and he was eventually killed by Russian nobles hoping to protect the monarchy. Meanwhile, shortages and failure on the battlefield led to revolts, known as the February Revolution. Eventually, facing pressure from the revolters and from military and political leaders, Tsar Nicholas II abdicated. Moderate politicians set up the provisional government to rule Russia. At the same time, revolutionary socialists set up Soviets, which were councils or workers and soldiers. A radical Marxist socialist group called the Bolsheviks was led by Vladimir Lenin. Another group of more moderate socialists called the Mensheviks believed in achieving socialism through gradual reforms. On the other hand, Lenin and the Bolsheviks believed that only revolution could bring about socialism. During the February Revolution, the Germans, who were still at war with Russia in World War I, helped an exiled Lenin return home, hoping his return would weaken the Russian government. The provisional government, which was led by Alexander Kerensky, failed to fix the problems that the people had been facing since the rule of the Tsar. Russia was still at war, and the people demanded land and food. Lenin and Leon Trotsky, another Marxist, led the Bolsheviks to further the revolution. They promised peace, land, and bread. Finally, in the October Revolution, which took place in November 1917, the Bolsheviks revolted against the provisional government. They took control of Russia, and set about making socialist reforms. After agreeing to a harsh treaty to end the war with Germany, they faced their enemies in the Russian Civil War. The Reds, also known as the Communists, were the Bolsheviks. The Whites who opposed them were everyone else. The Communists used brutal force to suppress the counter-revolution. They murdered Nicholas II and his family, set up a violent secret police called the Shika, set up forced labor camps, and implemented a policy known as war communism. They took over mines, factories, and railroads, demanded crops to feed the army, and drafted peasants to the military. The Russian Civil War ended in 1920 with a communist victory. Then, in 1922, with Lenin as the leader, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or USSR, or Soviet Union, was formed. Lenin abandoned war communism, which was detrimental to the Soviet economy. Instead, he adopted the new economic policy, or NEP, which allowed some capitalist ventures. This helped the Soviet economy recover. When he died in 1924, a communist leader named Joseph Stalin opposed Leon Trotsky, a viable candidate for leader of the Soviet Union. Stalin eventually got rid of Trotsky, who was later assassinated by one of Stalin's agents. He then took brutal measures to gain control of the Soviet Union.